we're going to first look at something called the lymphatic system today, which is something that you may not even be aware that you have, but is very important. And the lymphatic system is sort of like a bunch of vessels, these things called lymphatic vessels. And whenever I say vessels, what I mean are things like arteries and veins and capillaries. They're like tubes like that, okay? But these are separate from the arteries and veins and capillaries that are part of the circulatory system. These ones are their own ones called the lymphatic system, okay? And there's a separate type of fluid that's different from blood that gets circulated around. It's called lymph. Right? And it's used to sort of make sure that all the stuff that's inside your body is supposed to be in your body at any given point. Okay? So we can say this is a system of vessels that carry a fluid called lymph. And because there's no heart associated with the lymphatic system, there's no central pump, the lymphatic system is only going to be circulated by contractions of other muscles in the body. So some smooth muscle in the body, and also by skeletal muscle. So anytime you move around, you're squeezing the lymphatic vessels and sort of moving the lymph along. Okay? So it's mostly circulated by the contraction of skeletal muscle. Okay, so because people are generally not even aware that they have this system, I like to do this as sort of like a frequently asked question, like let's knock out the major important things. First of all, what is lymph? We said that lymph was the fluid, right? So what's it made out of? We know that blood is like white blood cells and red blood cells and proteins and stuff. So what's this lymph stuff? Lymph is all the excess fluid and lipids and proteins and pathogens that sort of get filtered out of your blood and also out of your what's called interstitial fluid or extracellular fluid. Okay, so it's excess fluid, lipids, proteins, and occasionally pathogens filtered out from blood and extracellular fluid. Like I said, sometimes extracellular fluid is called interstitial fluid, but extracellular is a more generic term, so it encompasses more things. Okay? So, this stuff, it gets through, it's all this extra stuff. And first of all, we said that the whole point of the lymphatic system was to make sure that all this stuff is allowed to be there. And so it's got to get checked by something. It's got to say like, hey, what's the actual point where we figure out if all this stuff is supposed to be there? And those points are called lymph nodes, which those are the things that everybody knows about. You know you have lymph nodes. You've felt them before, right? So what are lymph nodes? Okay? And if I had to ask you guys to point to your lymph nodes, where would you point to? Right here, right? This is where everybody knows you got lymph nodes. You can probably feel them right now. It's the winter time, so it's probably swollen a little bit. You got a little head cold or something like that. You can feel your lymph nodes. Now, what if I told you that you have lymph nodes all over your body, right? But these ones are the ones that you can constantly feel. Right? Why is it that these are your lymph nodes that are constantly swollen, and let's say the one that's in your armpit isn't swollen? You have one right here also in your armpit. Yeah. Yeah, so this one here is the one that's getting lymph from your sinuses, which is technically where you normally get sick, right? So you get a head cold or something, that's a sinus infection, and then that gets filtered out then into these lymph nodes right here, and then these ones are the first ones that then detect the infection. But let's say you're shaving your armpits or something like that, and you get a cut, and that cut gets infected, you will then get a lump right here, right? That's that lymph node then detecting that you have an infection. If you're like, oh my God, I got cancer or something like that, because that's not a normal place where you feel a lump normally, right? Whereas nobody thinks that they have cancer. You don't think you have throat cancer if you can, feel these lymph nodes because they're used to feeling them. Get a really bad ear infection, you'll get a lymph node that swells right here, right? But it happens to be that this is the first sort of checkpoint that filters out those pathogens, right? So we can sort of think about these lymph nodes as like security checkpoints that sort of say, all right, let's check the lymph that's coming through here to see if there's anything bad in it, and if there is, it's going to mount an immune response. Okay, so security checkpoints. That look for pathogens in lymph. And if they detect them, they will then start an immune response. Okay. Now the reason why they swell up is for two reasons. First of all, you have an increased amount of blood flow there and stuff. And second of all, is because it kind of like stops. It starts like a backup or something like that. So if you imagine like the TSA at the airport or something like that, everybody's moving along. You're taking off your shoes and whatever, right? Imagine somebody like tries to put a bomb in their shoe and they're in your line at the security checkpoint going into your terminal, right? That's done. You're going to miss your flight, right? Because, like, all these TSA agents are going to come in, the cops, the FBI, whatever, right? That line is going to stop moving, right? Or at least it's going to move very, very slowly because now they have to deal with this one problem here. Same thing goes with your lymphatic system. Once it detects a pathogen, it goes, all right, everybody stop. We got to deal with this. And so it stops allowing for that fluid to travel through as fast because now it knows that there's a pathogen and it has to be on a little bit higher alert. And so it then swells up because now it's got a whole bunch of extra lymph in there that wasn't there before. Okay? Last thing, what are the organs of the lymphatic system? What major organs are part of the lymphatic system? You got bone marrow. I think it was this class actually that I was trying to remember the word. So bone marrow is a adult stem cell, which means it's called pluripotent, which means that it can turn into just a couple of different types of cells. So it can turn into like a white blood cell or a red blood cell, and all the different types of white blood cells, and so a bunch of different things that it can turn into, but not everything. Okay. The other one is called totipotent. Totipotent means that it can turn into any type of cell, and we say that fetal stem cells are totipotent, meaning they can turn into anything. Okay, but these are adult stem cells that can only turn into a couple different types of things. And so one of the ones that's important is a B cell. Okay, B cells are a type of immune cell that are produced in the bone marrow. You've also got the thymus gland, and if you've taken AP Psych, you may confuse this with another gland called another gland called the thalamus, right? You've got the hypothalamus and the thalamus, and this is different than that. The thymus is here, the thalamus is here, right? And so the thymus doesn't produce any type of cells, but there's a type of cell called a T cell that develops in the thymus. So the bone marrow actually produces a T cell and then transports them into the thymus gland for maturation. And then you've got the spleen. The spleen is going to filter the lymph and blood. Okay, it sort of works like a really giant lymph node, right? And then you've got your lymph nodes, all the rest of the lymph nodes, and those detect pathogens. Okay, so this is one type of system that is a type, or that is part of another much larger system that's called the immune system, right? And the immune system is what we're going to look at next. I wish that I had a month. What's up?
Well, where does it go when it filters it out?
You mean for the spleen?
No, like all the lymph nodes.
The lymph nodes then dump back into the bloodstream. So you have this thing called the subclavian vein that sort of like dumps right back into your bloodstream. That's where all your lymph is actually going to come back in. But the idea is that all the stuff that shouldn't be there is filtered out or is stopped by those lymph nodes. And then once your body mounts an immune response, those pathogens get destroyed and they get turned back into things that are then allowed to pass through the lymphatic system. And then they'll all get dumped back into the blood system, and then they'll get filtered out eventually by your liver and by your kidneys.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. So I wish I had a month to talk to you about the immune system. I love it. It's so cool, so much fun. But we don't. We have 3 days, so we're going to go fast, and that sucks. But I'm going to try to make it as interesting as I can for those 3 days. So the immune system is always going to respond to a specific type of molecule that we refer to as an antigen, right? And that's kind of a cop-out because the term antigen just means anything that the immune system responds to. And in a perfect world, we could draw a Venn diagram. We could say these are the things that make you sick in this circle here, and these are the antigens. And like I said, in a perfect world, those circles would overlap 100%, right? But this is not a perfect world. There are a lot of things that don't make you sick that your immune system does respond to. And so we divide up the antigens into 2 groups, okay? Group number 1 are called pathogens, right? And pathogens are things that do make you sick, okay? Those are things like viruses and bacteria and fungi and animals and protists that cause disease. Okay, and that's what you want your immune system to respond to, is all these things that will eventually cause disease, right? But in actuality, there's another group that are called false antigens. Sometimes they're called false pathogens, but I like the term false antigen better, right? And those are things that your immune system responds to that will never make you sick, even if your immune system didn't respond to them. The most common type of those are the allergens. Things that are not harmful at all, but your body thinks are trying to kill you. Pollen, for example, is a really common allergen where if you get exposed to pollen, your body says, uh-oh, the pollen is trying to kill us. Let's mount an immune response against it to stop it, right? And it turns out that the most inconvenient thing is the immune response. It's not the pollen that's causing any problem. It's your body causing an immune response that's then giving you all these allergies, all these, red eyes and stuffy nose and things like that, okay? Also, anytime you have a non-self protein, that's going to be an antigen as well. Non-self proteins. So for instance, let's say I had type O blood, and I get a transfusion from somebody who has type A blood by accident, okay? That's super bad because type A blood has a protein on it, a protein marker that my body is not used to, okay? And so my body mounts an immune response against all those red blood cells then, okay? Which is very bad because then I needed the red blood cells in the first place. And then also my body thinks I have this massive infection, so it is going to start a massive immune response in order to combat that, okay? Even though if I just didn't do that, if I had no immune response and I got some type A blood, that type A blood would work just fine for me. Like it would do all the things that blood is supposed to do, but it's the fact that it's got this little protein marker on it that makes my immune system try to kill it because it thinks that it's bad because it's not part of my body normally, okay? you have two types of immune responses called specific immune response and non-specific immune response. Okay, they're exactly what they sound like. The specific immune response is going to look for specific types of pathogens. The non-specific immune response is going to do the same thing regardless of the type of pathogen. Okay, so we're talking about non-specific today. Okay, so step one in preventing you from being sick is stopping you from getting sick in the first place, right? So if you don't get sick in the first place, then your body doesn't have to make you better. So that's really the first thing the non-specific immune response does. It's got a bunch of barriers, a bunch of things that prevent these pathogens from entering your body in the first place. Okay, so skin is your first line of defense. It's watertight. Okay, it's not going to allow things to penetrate through it. There's got a whole bunch of very tightly adjacent epithelial cells that prevent anything from actually getting into your body. Now, if you get a cut or something like that, that's going to be a direct path that pathogen can take into your body, and that's why cuts often lead to infections, right? I could take a beaker or something like that had some pathogenic E. coli in it, and I could dip my hand in there and slosh it around all I wanted, right? And then take it out, wash my hands off, no big deal, right? But I get a couple of little micro abrasions, little cuts on my fingers, and I dip them in there, I'm going to have a bad time, right? Because that's going to be able to work its way through my body, through my bloodstream, and then cause disease, right? Cause me to get sick. Now, not only your skin, but also the oils that your skin produces. So oils on the skin make it hydrophobic. That's going to prevent aqueous solutions from being able to sort of enter through the epithelial cells. And also lower the pH of the skin. This is important because every type of bacteria has an ideal pH range that it can thrive at. Okay? And you have what are called commensalistic bacteria that live on the surface of your skin, and these bacteria have evolved over millions and millions of years to live specifically on our skin. Okay? They are at home at our pH range. They have enzymes that allow them to feed directly on the oils on our skin, and they're non-pathogenic. Okay? And that's great because that's the type of bacteria that we want on our skin, are the ones that don't cause disease. Because then, if a pathogenic bacteria starts to colonize our skin, it gets outcompeted by these non-pathogenic ones that are always there, and so that prevents us from getting sick in the first place. Okay? Not only your skin, but you've also got this other type of tissue called mucous membrane. Okay, mucous membrane is going to be anywhere that you have a hole in your body, right? So your eye sockets are covered in mucous membrane. The anus is covered in mucous membrane. The vagina is covered in mucous membrane. The throat, the lungs, the nose, right? All these things covered in mucous membrane produces this slimy, mucousy stuff by producing a protein called mucin that absorbs water. And mucin is an amazing protein. It can absorb something like 100 times its own weight in water. So that's why, like, if you've ever blown your nose and like gotten a whole bunch of snot out and been like, oh yeah, I feel so much, oh my god, I need to blow my nose again, right? And you're like, how can my body ever produce that much mucus? It's because it's not really producing that much mucus. It's producing a protein that's absorbing a lot of water, and then it's just taking water from the surrounding areas. So a lot of times when you have a runny nose, you also have like itchy, watery eyes, and your tear ducts dump any excess water that's in your eyes into your sinuses, and so like the the water in your eyes then turns into mucus in your nose by just being absorbed by this protein called mucin, right? And that's why if you cry a lot, you get a runny nose as well, because it's all getting dumped into your nose from excess water from your eyes, okay? So the whole point of this mucus in the first place is to just trap those pathogens before they get into your body and then enzymatically break them down. Traps pathogens and destroys them using enzymes. Okay, so your lungs produce a bunch of this mucus stuff, and that's good. It's trapping things like pollen and bacteria and stuff like that. And then you've got these hairs, these cilia in your lungs that are constantly pushing that mucus up through your trachea, and then it goes over the edge of your trachea and then into your esophagus, where it then travels down into your stomach. And then anything that was living, like bacteria, gets destroyed by the stomach acid in your stomach, and then would then be able to be not only used for food, but also then won't be dangerous anymore as it travels through your intestines, okay? So that's the final line of defense that I was talking about, is the stomach and the stomach acid. You say that acid in the stomach kills living things and denatures proteins before they can be absorbed, or before they are absorbed. So unfortunately, we don't have a lot of time to cover the stomach and the digestive system, but just a quick rundown of that to quell any misconceptions. Your stomach doesn't really do any absorbing of nutrients, okay? Your stomach is just there to be the first line of digestion, and really it doesn't even do that much digestion. You can think of your stomach sort of like as a blender, or almost. It's doing mostly mechanical digestion by like smashing the food up. It does have acid in it, so that acid helps to break down some of the stuff. But most of the digestion actually happens in your small intestines, and it happens because your body, your pancreas, produces these enzymes called like proteases and lipases that get released into your small intestines that allow them to break down all those macromolecules into their monomers. Okay, it's also the small intestine that does all the absorbing, or the vast majority of the absorbing. And so the stomach itself, you don't have to worry about living things being in your stomach, because they're going to get destroyed by all that acid before they actually get moved on into the intestine, where they could then actually have the chance to get into the body, right? We talked about the whole donut thing in this class, right? Where even though you think of your stomach as being the inside of your body, it's actually the outside of your body, right? And it's not until something actually gets absorbed through the intestines that it's actually now inside the body, right? So it's like this hole that runs through your entire body, like the inside of a donut, right? All right. Next, the non-specific immune system has a class of white blood cells called phagocytes. And there's three types of phagocytes that we're going to look at. What are called neutrophils, dendritic cells, and monocytes. Okay, so the neutrophils are going to deal with larger infections or larger pathogens. Okay, so if you get like a pathogen that's caused by like a nematode or something like that, or like a protist, it's going to be dealt with mostly with neutrophils. The dendritic cells are going to be the cells that are the closest to the surface of your skin, so they're going to be like your primary line of detection for those pathogens that would be going in through like a cut or an abrasion, right? So near the skin surface. And then monocytes you've probably never heard of, but they are actually going to differentiate into the most important and most known about type of white blood cell, which is called a macrophage. Okay, and macrophages are going to actually, macro means large and phage means eater, right? So these are the large eaters, and so they're going to actually go around and consume these pathogenic particles, okay? Infection site. Now, the interesting part about them starting out as monocytes is because they're macrophages, they're really big, okay? And the way that these white blood cells actually get to the site of the infection is they go through your bloodstream, right? And then they can slip through the spaces in between the cells that make up the blood vessels, right? And then get to the site of infection. But a monocyte is or a macrophage is so big that it can't really get through those spots, can't get through the spaces between. And so it has to start out as this thing called a monocyte, and the monocytes are smaller, and then when they get to the site of the infection, they differentiate into macrophages, and then we call them resident macrophages at that point because they can't leave anymore because they're way too big to actually get out of that site, and so they'll remain there for the entire duration of the infection, and then they go through apoptosis afterwards, right? Last thing that is part of the non-specific immune system is called the inflammatory response. Which time do I have left? Early release 53. Oof. Okay, so the inflammatory response is mediated by these cells that are called mast cells. And mast cells have receptors on them that are receptors for something that are called antibodies, or sometimes you'll see them called immunoglobulins, right? And there's a bunch of different types of them. You can see like immunoglobulin Gs and immunoglobulin Es, and in your book, I think what they use is just the abbreviation, so it'll say capital I, lowercase g, and then like capital E would be an immunoglobulin E. And based on the type of antibody that it is, there's going to be a different type of cell that responds to it. And mast cells happen to respond to a bunch of different types of them. Mostly immunoglobulin Es, but a bunch of different types, okay? And so these mast cells are going to sort of take the signals that say that there's an infection, and then they are going to elicit a larger scale response, okay? So we can say that mast scales detect the signs of an infection which are called antibodies, and release histamine. You've probably heard of histamine before. It's a hormone, and it's a hormone that is going to elicit what's called the inflammatory response. Okay, we can say that histamine causes dilation of the blood vessel, dilation of blood vessels, dilation of blood vessels, which leads to swelling, redness, and warmth, pain. But most importantly, those things are all caused by increased blood flow. Okay, and the reason why this happens, if you think about the blood vessels normally look something like this, where these are the cells that make up the walls of the blood vessel, and they're fairly close together. And then on the interior of this blood vessel, the blood travels through, in this direction, we'll say. And there's all kinds of stuff in there. You got proteins, you got red blood cells that are pretty small. They can still diffuse through sometimes, right? And you got white blood cells that are significantly bigger. Okay? And so some of these things are diffusing in and out, sometimes. But, vast majority of the time they're not doing that. Because the spaces are very small. Okay? You add some histamine, so plus histamine. And what you end up with are vastly larger spaces in between those cells. Okay, so you still got all this stuff in here. Now you got an increased volume of blood, right? You still got your white blood cells. You got your red blood cells. But now there's really nothing to hold them in. And so this is just constantly diffusing out of here. Everything's sort of escaping. Your blood vessels are leaking, essentially. But it's good that your blood vessels are leaking because they're leaking into the site of the infection, right? Which is what you want, because in the site of the infection, you're going to need increased amount of oxygen. You're going to need an increased amount of the proteins that are in your blood. You're going to need an increased amount of white blood cells in that site of the infection. And so it's really good that this is happening because it's supplying you with all the stuff that you need to fight off that infection. Okay? Now, it's bad when this happens for no reason, right? So let's say you have a pollen allergy or something like that. The pollen then makes your body produce IgEs, immunoglobulin E's, and then the mast cells then respond to those, and then they respond to it by releasing histamine, and so you get stuffy nose and like red eyes, and you're like, oh, I got to take some Benadryl or something. Benadryl is an antihistamine, and it stops your mast cells from producing histamine. Now, this is going to stop any valid immune response as well, but it's also going to stop the annoying immune response that is caused by allergens. Okay? You can also think about what happens for somebody who has like a really bad, like let's say a nut allergy or something like that. Okay? So you eat a peanut, your body goes, oh my God, the peanut's trying to kill us, right? And all of the mast cells in the body then start releasing histamine. This causes what's called a systematic immune response or systematic inflammatory response. And the result of that is that all of your blood vessels start to dilate. Okay? So you have a finite amount of blood in your cardiovascular system. And if all of your blood vessels get bigger, what that does is now you've got the same amount of volume of blood in a much bigger volume of space. And so it reduces the pressure, which we refer to as blood pressure, reduces your blood pressure to a dangerously low amount that stops your blood from being able to transport things to like oxygen to your brain, and you end up passing out. It also causes swelling that can prevent you from breathing, prevent you from swallowing, things like that. So what do? We give those people epinephrine, right? Epinephrine is the fight or flight response, right? And so those cause your blood vessels to then constrict, right? Which then counteracts this response and makes it so your body then doesn't die. You don't pass out, right? Questions on that? All right, that's it.